Hey everyone, Zach here. Having just watched the 7th episode of Voltron Legendary Defender's 3rd season, already the season finale, the legend begins. I do often love an origin story, and this episode is no exception. But again, like the season 2 episode, Eye of the Storm heavily reminded me of the Avatar season 2 episode, The Chase. I'm wondering if there was some creative inspiration for this episode, this backstory, with the Avatar Season 3 episode, The Avatar and the Fire Lord, which detailed Avatar Roku and Fire Lord Sozin's shared history and how their lives affect the current context of the war in that series. Because this episode is very much about exploring the dynamic between Alfor of Altea and Zarkon of Diabazal. And the framing device is about the Paladins further wondering what Lotor and the Galra Empire want with this comet material, how it fits into their ongoing plans of conquest, and so on. And so Koran gives them quite the history lesson. I'm not entirely sure how much he directly knows of, and like what's being filled in to just give the viewer a more full story. But given that he's at least around a generation older than Allura, he probably knows quite a bit, at least if not from directly witnessing it, then learning about it over time. So I basically began with Alfor and Zarkon being 2 of 5 like adventurous leaders from all different planets, different species, looking past their cultural differences and overall just believing in like heroism, justice, that good stuff. One night, a comet crashes on Diabazal, and Alfor decides to study the material. As a lab is gradually constructed around the strange rift left there by its planetfall. The transdimensional properties are soon discovered, as well as the bridge to an alternate reality is realized through the actual crash site. Eventually, Alfor works on constructing the Voltron lions through the comet's ore, and even beyond his knowledge and his understanding, they seem to evolve on their own. That their intelligence, their own sentience, pretty much, is something Alfor did not plan on. Originally, they were just referred to as ships, which is functionally accurate, but of course, as we know in the current day of the show, they're so much more than that. The studies of the rift and the quintessence properties of it were heavily studied by the Altean scientist and alchemist Onerva. And unfortunately, the experiments seemed to awaken a bizarre, like, shape-shifting energy creature from the rift, which leads to them mobilizing as the Paladins for, I think, the first time. I just watched it, but there's a lot of details to keep track of. And not only are the Lions' intelligence sort of a self-formed characteristic, but in fact their fusion into Voltron is. The Paladins originally just feel unique psychic bonding energy as they fly in formation, and then soon after they fly high into the sky, they come back down as the big robot himself. But with that threat taken care of, Voltron becomes a new symbol of justice and heroism. Of course, the defender of the universe. But unfortunately, Zarkon and Onerva's further studies of, the basic origin point for Voltron sort of consumes them both, drives them, increases their ambitions to concerning levels. Although even as Zarkon's concerns seem to center more around just his people, his planet, rather than the collective universal community that's been formed. They still work together, they still consider each other friends. Unfortunately, Minerva's health is being drained away from her obsessive studies, her sort of poisoning from just her exposure to the experiments. And Zarkon comes upon the idea that now the rift must be closed for everyone's safety. But unfortunately, it seems to involve opening it more widely in order to shut it down. So the team takes Voltron into the rift, into this apparent bridge between the realities. But that was a ruse. Zarkon exits the Black Lion with Minerva's frail body, an attempt to rejuvenate her, and perhaps himself, with pure quintessence exposure. But even as they're recovered from their teammates, taken back to their native reality, turns out it was sort of an overload of energy. They die as a result. Alfor sort of takes up charge, even with his original position as the Red Paladin. He figures the only way to permanently close the rift is to destroy the planet Dibazal. The Galra populace fully evacuates. The planet's torn apart, basically for people's safety. And sometime later, Zarkon recovers, is resurrected from his quintessence exposure, but sort of physically and psychologically disfigured as a result into his modern day warlord self. And Minerva has become Witch Hagar. And with that, the war began. He tried to reclaim control of Voltron from Alforb by taking his fleet on a vengeful mission against the Alteans, destroyed their world as retribution for Dibazal's death. And it seems from that conclusion, with the recovering of the new comet, the attempted seizure of Voltron, it appears like it's overall been missions to harvest the purest quintessence possible, to make weaponry, to bring expansion, potential immortality, so that basically he can rule over all living things in the universe. And he's already come quite close, just through his imperialist ambitions. And a couple little details that I was wondering about. It originally wasn't realized that Hagar is Altean, and I think from his story, Koran only figured that Zarkon returned from the dead. So he might not have realized that Minerva became Hagar. I just figured she permanently died. And admittedly, with the other three original Paladins, I don't quite remember their names or their planets of origin. Given a little bit of characterization, but not a lot. Again, it's mostly about Alfor and Zarkon. Sorry. But with that, we have the third season completed. And based on the little season 4 teaser shown after this episode's credits, this really does seem more like a mid-season finale rather than a full ending. I think the next season's only 6 episodes, so that can be put together as a 13-episode story. But that being said, this was still very enjoyable. Story, character, animation are still as good as they've been throughout the show. Lotor's an interesting new villain. Speaking of villains, I actually forgot another framing thing that actually ended this episode and thus the season. Hagar is thinking back to when Zarkon saved her all those millennia ago, and decides and realizes she can return the favor, in fact. And with some of her quintessence magical abilities, she, at the very least, brings Zarkon back to consciousness. It's unknown if he'll be fully physically active very soon, but he's not comatose anymore. So, it's sometimes said with Netflix original series that it's not really like watching a TV season. It's more like watching a really long movie, 5-10 hours, however long the full runtime is. But with this season, it's kind of just like a somewhat long movie, around 2.5 hours total. Whenever I revisit it in one sit, I'll see how that goes, how it flows together. It'll probably still feel like it's half of a bigger saga, but it'll still be a unique experience. Now, Season 4 is set to be released in early October, so now will be quite a wait to resume these videos. But I hope to return as soon as the show does. So I'll see you in episode 32.